Hello friends! Today I'm going to tell you about something very strange that happened to me the other day. But first, some background. Now I live in a big city, which means that the Shen Yun performers recently came to town. If you live in a big city like me, you are probably vaguely familiar with them. They are like a traditional Chinese dance troupe thing. They were here in Vancouver during March, and during that time, they were really advertising all over the place. You'd go to the mall and they would have like a little table set up in the middle of the place with, you know, the brochures and like a little TV playing highlights from the show. Now, I don't know about you, but traditional Chinese dancing has never really been my thing, so I did not give the Shen Yun people that much attention when they first appeared. But at the same time, they were pretty hard to ignore. They had ads all over the train and in the newspaper and in billboards all over town. You know, it was a little bit much. And after a while, something started to feel a little bit off about them. Like that maybe they were trying a little bit too hard. I was at Best Buy one day, and right at the entrance, they had a little Shen Yun display with the TV. And so I stood there and I watched a bit of the trailer, and it was pretty odd. They showed some testimony of people who were supposedly just leaving the performance, and they all seemed just a little bit too giddy.
I'm incredibly inspired after coming tonight.
I feel 30 years younger.
Normally I'm bored when she takes me to these things, but I loved it. I could go another couple hours.
It was just amazing.
See it 100 more times.
It's actually even worse if you visit the website. I've reviewed over 3,000 shows. None can compare to what I saw tonight. Go back and see it about 6 times, says Richard Conema, renowned Broadway critic. Go see it to believe it, because otherwise you are going to miss the most important thing in your life, says Joe Hurd, former White House photographer who watched Shen Yun 3 times. This is what he is credited as. I noticed a lot of the testimonials also made a big deal about how supposedly spiritually uplifting the show is in particular. A lot of the rhetoric is like,
I see God. I see the spirit of love and peace and the way that you would want the universe to be.
Now, as you have probably concluded by now, Shen Yun is actually just a front for a cult. Here is an excerpt from a review in The New Yorker. The dances continued, sleeves swirling, skirts rippling. A man came on stage to sing a song in Chinese, which was translated on the screen behind him. We followed Dafa, the Great Way, he began, singing about a creator who saved mankind and made the world anew. Atheism and evolution are deadly ideas. Modern trends destroy what make us human, he sang. That same New Yorker piece also noted that there isn't really even such a thing as traditional Chinese dance. The Shen Yun people just exploit the cultural ignorance of white folk to reel them in. But here is where the story gets even more interesting. You see, Shen Yun is run by the Shen Yun Performing Arts Organization, which is run by the Falun Gong. The Falun Gong is a Chinese cult started in 1992 by Li Hongzhi, who claims to be a supernatural being from another dimension sent to Earth to save humanity through a combination of breathing exercises and books on tape. The pitch is that if you follow Master Li's teachings, you can eventually cleanse your body of all weakness and illness and eventually transcend the fleshy prison of the cursed human world and ascend to a higher plane of existence where you can become a perfect godlike being, much like Master Li himself. It's a lot like Scientology, basically. And much like Scientology, as long as you profess undying loyalty to the Master, you will eventually be saved when the era of great cleansing comes and the enlightened are separated from the impure. Incidentally, in Master Li's world, impure behavior includes things such as using medicine, homosexuality, and race mixing. So yes, the whole thing seems a bit nuts. But hold on to your hats, because it gets even weirder from here. You see, we are not supposed to say too many mean things about the Falun Gong people, because they are so heavily persecuted by the Chinese government. Much like the Romans in Jesus' time, the Chinese Communist Party considers Master Li to be a troublemaker whose wacky beliefs could undermine their tyrannical hold on the public. So Falun Gongism is banned in China, forcing Mr. Li to preach his nonsense from New York, where he has lived in exile since 1998. According to Amnesty International, over the last 20 years, tens of thousands of Falun Gong practitioners have been arbitrarily detained as part of a campaign of intimidation and persecution targeting the group. Practitioners have been held in psychiatric hospitals, re-education through labor facilities, a form of administrative detention imposed without charge, trial, or judicial review, or sentenced to long prison terms. This is obviously very sinister, but the Falun Gong people think it doesn't sound bad enough. Master Li obviously has a vested interest in making himself sound very big and powerful and threatening, with, millions of followers. And as a result, official Falun Gong propaganda, including the Shen Yun show, often play up their persecution to cartoonish extremes. I remember a while ago, the Falun Gong people commissioned this flaky Canadian politician named David Kilgour to write a big report proving that the Chinese government had in fact detained hundreds of thousands of Falun Gong practitioners and was harvesting their organs while they were still alive. This is a very common Falun Gong allegation, but it is also one that human rights experts are pretty skeptical of, just because there's not really a lot of hard evidence. The Chinese government does have a gruesome history of harvesting and selling the organs of executed prisoners, but there is no real proof that the Falun Gong people specifically have been on the receiving end of this, let alone that they comprise the majority of its victims. It seems like a bit of a PR tactic of just taking one of the most sensationalistically evil things that the Chinese government has ever done and trying to conflate it in the mind of the international community with the more generalized persecution of the Falun Gong. But anyway, the point is, because we in the West do not really like the Chinese communists, particularly how little respect their government seems to have for the right of freedom of religion in that country, there has been a lot of pressure over the years to not be too critical of the Falun Gong. The thinking is that if we concede that the Falun Gong is a cult, which it very obviously is, we will be legitimizing the pretext that the Chinese use to suppress freedom of religion in general, particularly to Christians and Muslims. The Chinese state argues that religion is something inherently dangerous and subversive, and thus needs to be controlled by the government. And we in the West say, no, religion is good and harmless, even though we all know on some level that that's not always true. Religious groups can, in fact, be bad things, but the Chinese have gone way too far with this conclusion, and we don't want to give them any moral cover for doing that. As a result, when the Falun Gong is talked about in America or Canada or Europe or wherever, you are very likely to hear a lot of euphemistic language about how it is just a spiritual movement and this sort of thing. Governments in the West also tend to talk about the persecution of the Falun Gong as being one of China's most visible human rights abuses. The Chinese government, in turn, really hates it when the West does this. They think that we are really enabling this group that they see as a serious threat. Ever since Master Li's exile to America, Falun Gong has spent a lot of time propagandizing to Chinese immigrants in the West, and he seems to have been relatively successful. Here in Vancouver, for instance, which has quite a large Chinese population, you do often see Falun Gong demonstrations against the Chinese government in public protests and stuff. Sometimes they're camped outside government offices and things. The Falun Gong also owns a newspaper called the Epoch Times, which you may have seen. It's very anti-communist as well. But of course, nothing compares to the Shen Yun extravaganza. All right, now let us bring the story back to me. The other day I get an email from some guy named Franco, and he is like, I have a video I want you to put on your YouTube channel. I will give you $500 if you do. And this is very hilarious to me because Franco is very obviously just some sort of Chinese agent who is trying to rope me into some sort of anti-Falun Gong propaganda campaign. The video is terrible. It features a white guy sitting in what I can only describe as a North Korean news studio, blandly reading some script about how evil the Shen Yun show is.
I hope everyone can truly see the real purpose of this forum and the hopes in this video to avoid feeling cheated in the future.
It is so obviously communist propaganda, it really boggles my mind that they thought this would be persuasive to anyone, or that you guys would just accept this if I put this on my channel. It is also a little bit insulting to me that Franco has done absolutely no research into my own background, given that a quick Google search would find that I have written some very critical articles about the Chinese government for the Washington Post. Now obviously I had no intention of taking Franco's money or playing along with his little stunt, but I did try to string him along for a little bit, just so I could learn more about this crazy scheme. I asked him if the money was coming from the Chinese government, and he denied this, But then I said, okay, so how about if I insert a little bit at the beginning where I talk about how evil the Chinese Communist Party is? And he was like, no, you can't do that. I also asked him about the guy in the video, if he maybe had his own YouTube channel or something. And Franco was like, no, he is just a small reporter. I think it would be cool to track him down though. I suspect they paid him a lot, but I wonder if he regrets it. He's probably just some white guy living in China, and I know that they can be easy marks sometimes. If you guys know any good sleuthing techniques, let me know. Anyway, the point I am trying to get across in this video is that propaganda is a complicated thing. To live in the modern world is to be targeted by elaborate, expensive campaigns designed to change your thinking, while also concealing the hand of the person who wants to do that changing. It is also important to understand that propaganda lives in a complex ecosystem in which it responds to and interacts with other forms of propaganda. It is clear, for instance, that both Master Li and the Chinese government feed off the propaganda of each other, and this results in an endless cycle of disinformation in which it is very difficult to tell truth from fiction. The organ harvesting thing is a good example. Both sides have such little credibility, it is really difficult to know what to think. Now, personally, I think that a tyrannical communist government is evil, but I also think that a messianic apocalyptic cult is evil in its own way as well, and yet a PR battle is being waged across the world right now, trying to convince us that we have to pick a side. The last thing either side wants is for people to think for themselves. That is the biggest threat of all.